What if the thing heaven noticed was something nobody else could see? Not the prayer you said out loud, not the favor you did for someone, not the pain you carried quietly. What if it was one private decision made when the old version of you expected to take control again? Maybe there was a message you wanted to send. You did not send it. Maybe there was a person you wanted to chase. You let them walk. Maybe an argument opened in front of you, and you realized winning it would cost more peace than it was worth. So you chose differently. That choice mattered. Chosen one. Maybe nobody around you knows what that moment cost. They only saw you stay quiet. They only saw you leave. They only saw you stop explaining yourself. But inside, something bigger was happening, because a pattern that once controlled, you reached again and found less power. I cannot claim to know the private thoughts of heaven, but I can tell you this. Real change often shows itself first in what can no longer control you. Before your money changes, before your relationships change, before the door opens, your response changes first. Think about your last difficult moment. What did you do differently this time? Did you pause instead of react? Did you tell the truth instead of trying to please everyone? Did you keep your boundary while guilt pulled at you? Did you refuse to abandon yourself just to feel wanted? Do not dismiss that answer. It is our first clue. A person can repeat affirmations for years and still react from the same wound. A person can watch hundreds of messages and still choose the same pattern. But when the pattern appears and your choice changes, something deeper has begun moving. This message is not about waiting for another prediction. It is about recognizing what may already be different inside you. You may still feel tired. You may still feel uncertain. You may still have days when fear gets loud. None of that automatically erases the progress you made. Here is the strange part. The moment you begin changing inside, you often expect the outside to change immediately. You expect the relationship to improve. You expect money to move. You expect your direction to become obvious. And when those things do not happen fast enough, you start doubting yourself. That doubt is where many people go backward. They reopen the old door. They chase the old answer. They assume that if the visible reward has not arrived, then the invisible change must not be real. But that conclusion can destroy something precious before it becomes stable. So mark your moment with one simple sentence. I chose differently. Not because you were perfect, not because fear disappeared. You chose differently because fear was present, the old pattern was available, and something in you refused to give it the final vote. Now, a bigger question opens. If you have already changed on the inside, why can your life still look so similar outside? Why can you feel stronger in one moment, then scattered the next? Why can you know what is right, but still struggle to move with clarity? That is where this message really begins. The answer is not simply more faith. It is not more pressure. It is not another reason to blame yourself. There is a gap between inner change and outer movement. Then things make sense. The old version of you did not disappear overnight. It still knows your weak places. It remembers which silence makes you anxious, which rejection makes you question yourself, and which familiar pain can pull you back into behaviors you promised you had outgrown. That is why growth can feel confusing. You can be stronger and still feel triggered. You can be wiser and still feel anger. You can know your worth and still want to chase. The presence of the feeling does not mean the old pattern still owns you. Many people misread their healing here. They think a healed person never feels the old emotion again. But progress often looks different. The trigger arrives, the old story begins, and then something new steps in before that old story becomes another old decision. That new step is the heaven noticed moment. It is the instant when the same situation produces a different choice. Nothing around you may change in that second, but the authority inside you changes, because the old version of you no longer gets an automatic yes. Maybe you still wanted to send the message. You simply did not send it. Maybe you still wanted their approval. You stopped performing for it. Maybe you still felt the anger. You refused to let anger decide your next move. The feeling remained, but its command weakened. That distinction changes everything. Feeling fear is not the same as obeying fear. Feeling lonely is not the same as returning to what hurt you. Feeling angry is not the same as giving anger control. Your emotions can speak loudly while your deeper self chooses something different. Think of the pattern that used to catch you fastest. Maybe it was over-explaining. Maybe it was people-pleasing. Maybe it was checking your phone every few minutes. Maybe it was quitting when progress became uncomfortable. Now ask yourself one question. Does that pattern still get the same vote? If the answer is no, even slightly, notice it. The old you may still enter the room, but the old you is no longer the only voice there. That is how identity begins separating itself from habit. You may have been judging yourself by the wrong evidence. You looked for complete confidence and a life without setbacks. But perhaps the stronger evidence is simpler. The same pressure came back, and you made a different move. So stop asking whether you are completely healed. Ask whether the old pattern has complete authority. Those are not the same question. One demands perfection, the other reveals progress. And progress becomes easier to trust when you can point to a real choice made under real pressure. Say this to yourself now: the old me lost. Not because the past vanished, not because every wound closed. The old you lost because it showed up with the same script, and this time you did not automatically read your old lines. You did not need the situation to become easier before you became different. You became different while the situation was still difficult. That means something in you has already moved beyond the place where this story began. But another mystery remains. If the old pattern has less control, why do you still have days when your mind feels unclear? Why can you protect your peace and still struggle to focus? Why can you know what matters, yet feel scattered when it is time to act? That question takes us deeper. Emotional freedom and clear execution are not identical. You can stop returning to what hurt you and still wonder why your attention, memory, energy, or direction does not feel strong. Here is where the story becomes more uncomfortable. You can change internally and still wake up to the same bills, the same room, the same job, and the same unanswered questions. That can make progress feel fake, even when something real has shifted inside you. This delay has a name: the inner-outer lag. It is the space between becoming different and seeing your circumstances reflect that difference. Your identity can move before your bank account moves. Your boundaries can change before your relationships adjust. Your thinking can improve before your environment does. That does not mean you should sit still and call every delay divine timing. It does not mean action is unnecessary. It means visible results and internal transformation do not always arrive together, and confusing those timelines can make you sabotage progress that was becoming stable. Imagine someone who finally stops chasing approval. The next morning, life may look almost identical. The same people are there, the same responsibilities remain, but one important thing has changed. Their decisions are no longer organized around the fear of rejection. That shift may not produce a dramatic reward immediately, but it changes what they accept, what they tolerate, and which opportunities they notice. Over time, those choices can create a different life. This is why you must be careful with impatience. It can make you reopen a door that peace helped you close. It can make you return to what feels familiar. It can make you abandon a new standard before life has reflected it. You are not being asked to pretend everything is fine. You are being asked to measure the right thing. If your response changed, that matters. If your boundary held, that matters. If you chose truth over approval, that matters. The outside may need time and action to reflect what the inside began. Now picture a normal day from the version of you who keeps going. You wake up without needing someone else to validate your mood. You face a difficult message and keep your morning. You see a problem at work, and instead of spiraling, you look for the next useful decision. You still feel emotion, you still have pressure, but your attention returns faster. You can hold a thought long enough to use it. You can notice an opportunity without talking yourself out of it. But another question appears. What happens when your emotional patterns are changing, but your focus still feels weak? What happens when you are more grounded, yet your mind still feels noisy or scattered? There is interesting research around how different parts of the brain coordinate. I will return to it later, because it raises a useful question. What if conscious change has happened, but the system carrying that change into attention and action is still struggling? Do not assume that means something is wrong with you. It simply opens another layer of the problem. You may not need another sign. You may need to understand why knowing clearly and using it consistently are not always the same ability. For now, keep one truth close. The delay outside does not erase the change inside. Your job is not to force the whole future into today. Your job is to protect the new pattern long enough to let your decisions start matching the person you are becoming. If you have been asking why life has not caught up yet, this may be your first answer. You are in the lag. But the lag is not the end. The next question is what helps inner clarity become outer movement, and that is where we go next. You do not need another sign. You may want one, especially when life feels quiet and nothing outside seems to confirm what changed inside you. But there comes a point when asking for more confirmation becomes another way to delay the next decision. You already know more than you admit. You know which relationship drains you. You know which habit keeps stealing your mornings. You know which idea keeps returning because part of you wants to build it. You know which conversation you keep avoiding. The problem is not always missing information. Sometimes, the problem is that information keeps arriving while action keeps waiting. That is a dangerous place, because consuming more can feel like progress. Another message gives you relief. Another prediction gives you hope. Another explanation gives your mind something new to hold. But if nothing changes in what you choose next, information can become a very comfortable form of avoidance. Chosen one. This matters because you may have confused receiving with moving. You can receive a powerful insight and still avoid the uncomfortable step it requires. You can understand your pattern and still repeat it. You can know your worth and still negotiate against it. Knowledge becomes transformation only when it enters behavior. So, ask yourself something simple. What do you already know that you keep asking life to tell you again? Maybe you already know the door is closed. Maybe you already know your body needs rest. Maybe you already know you must begin before you feel completely ready. This does not mean you should stop praying. It does not mean reflection has no value. It means more input is not always the answer. Sometimes the next level begins when you stop demanding another sign and start respecting the clarity you already received. Say this quietly. I receive clearly. Now think about an earlier version of yourself. Think about a time when curiosity came naturally. You would follow an idea because it interested you. You could become absorbed in something without constantly checking whether it was useful, profitable, approved, or impressive. Your mind moved with less noise. For some people, childhood held more of that feeling. For others, it appeared later, during a season when life felt lighter. You could remember things more easily. You could stay with a thought. You could create before judging every detail. Then pressure accumulated, and attention began to fragment. Responsibilities grew. Notifications multiplied. Stress became normal. You learned to carry 10 thoughts at once and finish none of them. You became more informed, but not always more clear. That difference is important. Knowing more and being able to use what you know are two different experiences. There is another layer here that we have not opened yet. Why can someone understand their emotional patterns, protect their peace, and still feel mentally scattered the next morning? Why can a person know exactly what matters, then lose focus when it is time to act? That question does not point to a lack of intelligence. It does not prove you are lazy. It does not mean you are less spiritual than someone who appears disciplined online. It points toward a gap between receiving information and organizing it into usable action. That gap is where we go next. Because if you keep blaming your character for a problem that lives partly in attention, memory, and mental coordination, you will keep applying pressure where pressure is not helping. You may not need a stronger lecture. You may need a clearer receiver. There is a reason some people can hear a message that changes everything, then wake up the next day and live almost exactly the same way. The insight was real. The emotion was real. The intention was real. But something happened between understanding and execution. That space has a name: the receiver gap. The receiver gap is the distance between knowing what matters and being able to hold that knowledge long enough to use it. You may read a page and realize you absorbed almost none of it. You may walk into a room and forget why you went there. You may have an idea, then lose it under 10 other thoughts. You may know the next step for your business, your health, or your relationships. But when the moment arrives, your attention breaks apart. You open one thing, then another. You check a message. You remember something unrelated. An hour passes, and the action that mattered most is still waiting. This can create shame very quickly. You tell yourself you lack discipline. You call yourself inconsistent. You compare your private confusion with somebody else's public momentum. Then you add more pressure, more rules, and more content. But pressure does not automatically create clarity. Sometimes it makes the noise louder. This is why the question from earlier matters. We talked about research around how different parts of the brain coordinate. The important point is not that one side of your brain is good and the other is bad. Human cognition is more complex than that. The useful question is whether the systems you rely on for attention, memory, pattern recognition, creativity, and decision-making are working together as efficiently as you want them to. Because if coordination is poor, more information may simply create more traffic. That traffic can feel like mental fog. Think about how often intuition arrives in a clean second. You suddenly know what to say. You suddenly see the solution. You suddenly understand what the pattern means. Then, almost immediately, noise enters. Doubt arrives. Another thought interrupts. You question the first signal until the moment is gone. That does not mean every first thought is truth. Discernment still matters. But it shows something important. Clarity can appear before your mind becomes crowded again. The problem is not always that you have no answer. Sometimes, the answer cannot stay visible long enough to become a decision. This is the receiver gap. And here is the twist. You may have spent months trying to solve it by adding more advice, more motivation, more techniques, more videos, more pressure. But what if the missing piece is not another thing to put into the receiver? What if the missing piece is supporting the receiver itself? That question changes the direction completely. Instead of asking how to force yourself to think harder, you begin asking how to reduce friction. Instead of assuming you need more intelligence, you ask whether the intelligence you already have is being accessed cleanly. Why can you understand all of this tonight and still wake tomorrow feeling scattered? Why can insight remain insight instead of becoming movement? That is the missing piece. And it matters because the next step is not about becoming a different human being. It is about creating better conditions for the mind you already have to do what it already knows how to do. You are not empty. You are not waiting to be filled with some secret identity. The next question is simpler. How do you support the receiver that must carry your clarity into real life? That is where this becomes practical. You do not need more force. That may be hard to accept if you have spent years believing every problem can be solved by trying harder. More motivation, longer meditation, more affirmations, more discipline, more guilt. But if the bottleneck is inside the receiver, pushing harder into the same bottleneck does not remove it. Think about a crowded doorway. Sending more people toward it does not create more space. It creates pressure. Your mind can work the same way. If attention is fragmented and mental noise is high, adding more information may increase the friction you are trying to escape. This is the missing piece. The why is simple. You have changed internally, but clarity and action may still lag behind. The what is the receiver gap. The WHO is not a lazy, broken, or spiritually defective person. It is someone whose insight may be moving faster than their ability to organize and execute it. The clarity you have gained is real, but clarity alone is not movement. The only question left is how you support the receiver that must carry that clarity into your life. This is where I want to mention a tool you can investigate for yourself. It is called the Genius Switch. It is a digital audio sequence built around a short daily listening routine, roughly 8 minutes with headphones. According to the product materials, it uses what they call neural sync technology as part of an approach intended to support coordination in brain activity. The program materials are associated with Dr. Daniel Barone, a neurologist in New York. They also reference the broader history of split brain research connected with Roger Sperry and hemispheric specialization. That research does not prove this product works, and claiming that it does would be misleading. This is not a miracle. It is not a promise that you become a genius overnight. It is not a substitute for sleep, action, medical care, or disciplined choices. It is positioned as a passive audio routine for people interested in focus, clarity, creativity, or mental coordination. You do not need to be good at meditation. You do not need a mantra. You do not need a long breathing practice. Maybe you are thinking, I have tried audio programs before. That is fair. The product is presented as different from a generic soundtrack, but you should still use discernment. Its sales materials include testimonials describing changes in focus, direction, and mental engagement, but personal reports are not guarantees. The offer materials present lifetime digital access and a money-back guarantee under the current terms. They list $49 as the regular price, while the offer referenced in the product file presents $39. They also use a higher value anchor, around $500. The package includes a guided visualization, a smart grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, and a 5 habits infographic. What matters most is whether the core routine fits what you are actually looking for. Do not buy it because you are afraid to miss something. Do not treat it as proof that you are chosen. If the receiver gap sounds familiar, this may simply be one tool worth examining. The official information is in the description and pinned comment. Do not assume something with a similar name on YouTube, Spotify, or another marketplace is the same official program. If you investigate it, use the official information, read the current terms, and make your own decision. Because the goal is not to purchase another identity. The goal is to support the person you have already become, then carry that clarity into real choices. The tool is not the transformation. You are. That distinction matters now, because the easiest mistake after hearing about any new method is to imagine that buying something creates a new identity. It does not. A tool can support a routine. A routine can support attention. But your life still changes through the choices you make when nobody is watching. That brings us back to the beginning. Heaven was not smiling because you found a product. The moment that mattered came before any of this. It was the moment you chose differently. You protected your peace. You held the boundary. You refuse to return to the pattern that once made decisions for you. The next chapter is not about becoming somebody else. It is about becoming more consistent with the person you have already proven you can be. Insight must become a real decision you stop postponing. Imagine 6 months from now, not a fantasy life with no problems. Imagine something quieter and more believable. You wake up and your first hour belongs to you. Your mind is less crowded. You know the one thing that matters that morning, and you can stay with it long enough to make progress. A difficult message arrives. You feel the reaction, but it does not steal the day. A new idea appears. Instead of immediately doubting it, you write it down and test it. An opportunity shows up. You do not spend 3 weeks asking whether you deserve it. You look clearly, decide, and move. That is what forward movement can look like. Not constant certainty, not permanent motivation. Better recovery, cleaner decisions, less time lost between knowing and doing. Over months, those small differences can reshape work, relationships, creativity, and the way you experience yourself. Maybe the project you kept postponing finally exists. Maybe your attention returns often enough that creativity feels familiar again. They are possibilities created by repeated choices and better conditions. And if the tool I mentioned earlier fits what you are experiencing, the official information is still in the description and pinned comment. Look at it with discernment, not fear. You do not need to rush because somebody tells you your destiny depends on a purchase. It does not. Your responsibility is much more personal. Protect the clarity you have earned. Build routines that help you use it. Remove what repeatedly scatters your attention. Give your best ideas enough silence to become visible. Then act while the signal is still clear. Chosen one, there is freedom in understanding this. You do not have to spend your life chasing signs that tell you who you are. You can let your choices become evidence. Every time you refuse an old pattern, you strengthen a new one. Every time you act from clarity instead of panic, you make the new identity more familiar. One day, the changes that feel small now may become the structure of your entire life. People may call you different. They may say you became calmer, more focused, harder to manipulate, or more certain about where your energy belongs. They will see the result. They may never see the private decisions that built it, but you will know. You will remember the days when the old door was still open and you chose not to walk through it. You will remember how strange it felt to stop chasing what once had power over you. And you will understand that becoming was never one dramatic event. It was repetition. It was choosing again. It was refusing to hand your future back to a pattern just because the pattern felt familiar. That is the identity to protect now. Do not buy another identity. Live the one you have already earned. Now we can answer the question that has been following this entire message. What did you actually do that mattered so much? It was not one perfect act or proof that you never struggle. It was the moment you stopped abandoning yourself when the old pattern asked you to return. You stayed with discomfort instead of escaping it. You held a boundary when guilt tried to weaken it. You felt the urge to react and chose not to hand your peace away. You stopped asking somebody else to confirm your worth. Remember the first loop we opened. What did you do differently? You chose differently. That was the heaven-noticed moment. Remember the second question. Why has the outside not fully changed yet? Because inner change and outer results do not always move at the same speed. That was the inner-outer lag. Then came the third question. Why can you know what matters and still struggle to act with clarity? Because insight and execution are not identical. That was the receiver gap. And then we reached the final practical question. What supports the next stage? The answer was never one magical object. It was intentional restoration, better conditions, cleaner routines, and action that gives your clarity somewhere to go. A tool may support that process, but the choice still belongs to you. The real victory is not that the old pattern vanished. The real victory is that it can speak without automatically becoming your behavior. Your past may still knock. Old fear, may still make an argument. Old loneliness may still try to negotiate, but those voices no longer deserve the final vote. This is the part I want you to feel. You did not become stronger because life finally became easy. You became stronger while some things were still unresolved. You remained with yourself in uncertainty. That is why the old version could not fully come back. It needed your cooperation. It needed you to reopen the door. Little by little, you stopped cooperating. You stopped feeding the cycle. You stopped calling the same wound home. That is why your next season cannot be built by staring backward. It has to be built through repetition. One clear morning, one honest conversation, one boundary kept, one idea acted on, one moment when fear speaks and you choose before fear chooses for you. There may still be setbacks. Some days you may recognize an old reaction. Do not turn one difficult day into a verdict about your identity. Return to the evidence. You have already made choices that the old version of you would not have made. That is enough to prove movement is possible, and movement repeated becomes direction. Direction repeated becomes a life. So if you need a sentence to carry forward, use this one. I do not go back, not because the past never calls, because the past no longer gets to decide. Before we close, there is one final declaration for the version of you that is done returning to old doors. It is not a promise that every problem disappears tonight. It is a decision about who gets authority over your next step. You have spent enough time asking whether the change is real. Now let your next choices answer the question. The smile was never about perfection. It was about the moment the old life called your name, and you finally learned that you did not have to answer. Before this message ends, give yourself one quiet moment. Not to ask for another sign, just notice the distance between who you were and the person who is listening now. You carried things that once made you smaller, and you are still here. Now imagine the old version of you standing at a door behind you. You do not need to fight or hate that person, but it does not get to lead you where you are going next. See the door clearly. Notice what waits behind it. The chasing, the fear of silence, the habit of abandoning your own, knowing just to keep somebody near. You have visited that room enough. Close the door. You only need a decision. I do not return to what diminished me. I trust the clarity I have earned. I choose before fear chooses for me. My past may speak, but it does not vote. I carry my peace forward. I am becoming consistent with what I know. I do not need to chase what requires me to betray myself. I can move slowly without moving backward. I can feel uncertainty and keep my direction. I am chosen to live, not merely to wait. If you want to imagine heaven smiling today, do not imagine that smile because you became perfect. Do not imagine it because every prayer was answered or every problem disappeared. Imagine it for one quieter reason. The old version of you called, and you finally realized you did not have to answer. That is what changed. That is what you protect now. A pattern of choices. The next time the old door appears, remember this moment. You already know where that road leads. You may choose another road now. So, make the final declaration simple. I choose differently. Say it without forcing emotion. Say it because you have evidence. You have already done it once. You can do it again. And each time you do, the new path becomes a little more familiar. Carry that into tomorrow. Carry it into the next conversation, the next decision, and the next moment when fear asks for control. You do not need a dramatic sign to know which voice deserves your loyalty. Your life will answer through what you choose next. The door behind you can stay closed. Your hands are free. Your attention belongs in front of you. Your peace is not something you have to trade for permission. The choice is yours, and this time you know it. It is sealed.